Я желанием сгорая, страсти время не нашла, и рабов из стран Дуная, диких, таков позвала. Их троих поочередно, евнух мой водил чаток, но напрасно, но бесплодно утомить меня не мог. Было мне на ложе тесно, по Творцу ходила я, и пришла в покой безвестный, где стоит постель твоя, уронив свои покровы, стал ты нежно обнажен, без упруги, без уховы, там кора, там перл, там нен. Мальчик мой, будь смел, мы с ночной тыши одной, обопрись безвольным телом, ближе ядрами прильни. Есть в твоем недоумении неизведанная страсть, все поймешь, ты в упоении, дай к груди твоей припасть. Тише, тише, скоро, близок общий наш палач. Ах, нет сил, нет чувств, нет взад. Мальчик мой, не плачь.
The poem that I just read for you is called Messalina, and it was written in 1903 by Valery Brusov. Brusov was a well-known pioneer of what was called the Symbolist movement in Russia. Brusov and his colleagues, such as Fyodor Sologub and Zinaida Hipios, have been also referred to as Decadent writers. Although Symbolism and Decadence are technically distinct movements, they are represented in Russia by the same general body of work, and so I will be using the terms interchangeably for our purposes. Symbolism was an artistic and literary movement that actually came about in France long before it arrived in the motherland. It is, simply put, a descendant of the earlier Romantic movement in which human subjectivity and emotion were put above cold reason in response to the Enlightenment. Ideas of the Symbolists and Decadents were in direct response to and in criticism of the realist ideas of art that had preceded them. The Symbolists were not interested in reason or objective fact. They instead chose to focus on subjectivity, emotion, and spirituality. For the Russian Symbolists, the material world was at best irrelevant and at worst a deplorable place. Writers such as Brusov conveyed this fallen world in almost disturbing detail, often incorporating sexual depravity and violence into their work. One of his contemporaries, Fyodor Sologub, conveyed a similar message by focusing on the boring, banal nature of everyday life. Both of these writers pushed the envelope and tested the bounds of what was considered acceptable both in terms of writing style and subject matter. One of Brusov's most well-known poems consists of only a single line, "Oh, cover your pale legs." We can see here how he manages to challenge our conceptions of what a poem is while at the same time presenting us with rather gratuitous sexuality. The characters in the work of the Russian decadents are often of questionable moral character. Under the right circumstances, they engage in occult rituals, participate in orgies and BDSM scenes, and even commit murder. Although their outlook on life seems pessimistic, one thing above all was important to the Russian Symbolists and Decadents: the idea of spiritual transcendence. While the material world and society were little more than pretty wrappings used to cover up the horror of humanity, there was something greater than the material world that could be striven for. This sort of spiritual transcendence is often presented in strange ways. Frequently, it is achieved by characters through sex, death, or a combination of the two. It is explored by bringing together concepts that might seem contradictory on the surface. It is searched for in romanticized versions of cults and classical Greece and Rome. One might wonder why such a dark and chilling movement in literature became so influential. In Russia, the answer is clear. Decadence came to prominence during a turbulent time in Russian history. The revolution had not yet occurred, but people were beginning to question the established order. The middle class was becoming better educated, and they were able to write based on their experiences, which were frequently very complex compared to those of the aristocratic writers that came before them. When the revolution did come in Russia, the Symbolists and Decadents had high hopes that it would bring about the spiritual revival they so craved. They were ultimately disappointed. Many of them fled Russia before it became the Soviet Union. In the early Soviet years and the years immediately preceding, decadence fell out of fashion, and a new generation of symbolists arose to present more rarefied versions of the same ideas. The Russian decadents may not be as widely known today as Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, but they remain a fascinating part of the Russian literary canon. They are, as I like to say, the most metal of the Russian writers.
Rejection.